I stood in that courthouse watching my wife, Veronica, laugh as the judge handed her everything I'd worked 24 years to build. My $4.7 million Westbridge estate? Gone. Holloway Construction Group, the company I started with my father Harold's old tools and a rusted pickup, 75% hers. But the worst part? When she leaned over and whispered, "You'll never see Mason and Bethany again," and I watched my 14-year-old son and 12-year-old daughter walk out that door, looking back at me like I was some criminal who'd betrayed them. The judge's gavel had barely finished echoing when Veronica turned to me with that smile I once loved. Now it looked like a predator's grin. She was wearing the diamond necklace I'd given her for our 10th anniversary, and she kept touching it while her lawyer shuffled papers with theatrical satisfaction. "Congratulations, Mrs. Holloway," Preston Whitfield said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The Westbridge estate is officially yours, along with 75% of Holloway Construction Group. My name is Raymond Holloway. 6 months ago, I was living the American dream. I had built a construction empire from nothing, starting as a carpenter's apprentice when I was 18, working until my hands bled, saving every penny. By 42, I owned the largest residential construction company in the state. I had a beautiful wife, 2 amazing kids, and a 7-bedroom mansion that featured an Architecture Digest. Mason, my 14-year-old son, sat in the back row of the courtroom, his jaw clenched exactly the way mine does when I'm trying not to show emotion. Bethany, 12 and usually bubbling with her mother's energy, looked at me with confused eyes. They'd been told I was a criminal, that I'd stolen money, that I'd betrayed our family. The guardian ad litem kept them close, like I might contaminate them with my presence. "The court awards full custody to Mrs. Holloway," Judge Fairweather announced, reading from her notes without looking up. "Mr. Holloway will have supervised visitation pending completion of court-mandated therapy and financial restitution." Veronica stood up, smoothing her designer suit. She'd lost weight during the divorce proceedings, hired a new stylist, looked 10 years younger. The stress that was crushing me had apparently agreed with her. She walked past my table slowly, deliberately, her heels clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that sounded like victory. She leaned down next to my ear, close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same French brand I'd bought her every Christmas. "You'll never see Mason and Bethany again," she whispered, her breath warm against my skin. "I'll make sure they forget you exist. Maybe Derek will adopt them. They already call him Uncle D. Derek. Her personal trainer, who she swore was just a friend, until my lawyer found photos of them in Cabo while I was at my mother's funeral. The same Derek who now parked his Porsche in my garage spot. Carl, my court-appointed lawyer, after Veronica drained our accounts, packed his briefcase with the exhaustion of a man who'd fought a battle he knew he couldn't win. "Sometimes the system fails good people, Ray," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. I did what I could." What he could wasn't enough. Not against Veronica's legal team, not against the forensic accountants who somehow found irregularities in books I'd kept clean for 20 years, not against a judge who seemed to have her mind made up before we ever entered the courtroom. "Mr. Holloway," Judge Fairweather's voice cut through my thoughts, "you have 30 days to vacate any remaining personal items from the Westbridge property. Mrs. Holloway has graciously agreed to have them placed in storage, accessible once you've paid the fees." Graciously. My hands formed fists under the table. I'd built that house with my own company, had laid some of the foundation myself on weekends, teaching Mason how to read blueprints while Bethany played in the dirt that would become her mother's rose garden. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "your assets are frozen pending investigation into the financial discrepancies discovered during these proceedings. You are permitted to withdraw $200 weekly for basic expenses." $200. I'd spent more than that on a single dinner trying to save my marriage 6 months ago, the night Veronica had seemed distant, and I'd thought maybe we just needed to reconnect. She'd ordered the most expensive wine on the menu, and spent the entire meal texting someone she claimed was her sister. My mother, Dorothy, had been dying in hospice that week, and I'd stepped away from her bedside to have that dinner, thinking I needed to hold my family together during the hardest time of my life. Dorothy Holloway, who'd raised me in a 3-room apartment in Riverside Heights, who'd worked 2 jobs to keep food on our table after Dad's construction accident, who'd cried when I bought my first truck for the business. "Never forget where you came from, Raymond," she'd told me the last time she was strong enough to speak clearly. "Money comes and goes, but character is forever." The courtroom was emptying now. Veronica's heels echoed down the hallway, joined by the expensive shoes of her legal team. My children were ushered out a different door before I could even try to speak to them. Mason looked back once, and I saw myself at 14 in his eyes, confused, angry, trying to be strong. I sat in that empty courtroom for another 10 minutes, staring at the American flag behind the judge's bench, wondering how justice had become just another thing money could buy. My phone had 17 missed calls from former employees wondering if they still had jobs, 3 from suppliers wanting to know about pending payments, and 1 from my foreman, Lou, that just said, "I'm sorry, boss." The bailiff finally asked me to leave. "Building's closing, sir," he said, not unkindly. He'd seen this before, men in expensive suits that no longer had homes to go to, wedding rings they still wore out of habit more than hope. I walked out of that courthouse with nothing but my father's old watch and the work boots in my truck, the same boots I'd worn when I poured my first foundation, signed my first contract, built my life brick by brick, only to watch it demolished in a single afternoon. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up back in my mother's apartment, finding a box that would reveal the truth about everything, you need to know how a working man's son built an empire and lost it to a woman who played a longer game than I ever imagined possible. My name is Raymond Holloway, and this is the story of how I lost everything and discovered who I really was. Buried beneath the floorboards of the past my mother spent her entire life protecting me from. My story really begins 24 years ago, when I was 18 and showed up at Brennan Construction with nothing but ambition and my father Harold's old tool belt. Harold had died in a scaffolding collapse when I was 16, leaving my mother Dorothy with nothing but debt and a stubborn son determined to make something of himself. "You got any experience?" Frank Brennan had asked, looking me up and down like I was a stray dog at his doorstep. "No, sir, but I learned fast and I'm not afraid of hard work," I'd replied, standing straighter despite the holes in my boots. Frank hired me on the spot. Minimum wage, you start at 5 a.m. sharp. 1 minute late and you're gone. I was never late, not once in 6 years. I swept sawdust, hauled lumber, mixed concrete until my arms shook. At night, I studied blueprints by the light of my mother's kitchen table lamp while she hemmed clothes for extra money. Dorothy would bring me coffee at midnight, her hands rough from years of factory work. "Your father would be proud," she'd say, touching the tool belt hanging by the door. "He always said you'd build something great one day." By 24, I'd saved enough to buy my first truck and contractor's license. Holloway Construction started with 1 employee, me, and 1 client, Mrs. Chen from our apartment building who needed her bathroom remodeled. I did it for cost, and she told everyone at her church about my work. Word spread the way it does in working-class neighborhoods, where a good deal and honest work mean everything. The company grew slowly, then suddenly. A kitchen here, an addition there, then my first whole house, a modest 3-bedroom that I built like it was a mansion because my name was going on it. By 30, I had 12 employees and a reputation for finishing on time and on budget. That's when I met Veronica at the Riverside Hospital Charity Gala. I'd donated new windows for their children's wing, and they'd insisted I attend. I'd rented a tux that didn't quite fit right and spent the evening feeling like a fraud among the city's elite. "You look uncomfortable," a voice said behind me. I turned to find a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Elegant black dress, pearl earrings, the kind of confidence that came from never worrying about money. "First time wearing a penguin suit," I admitted, tugging at my collar. She laughed, not at me, but with genuine warmth. "I'm Veronica Ashworth, and you're Raymond Holloway, the contractor everyone's talking about." "Everyone?" I asked, surprised anyone noticed contractors at these events. "My father's in commercial development. He says you're the only honest builder left in the city." She stepped closer, and I caught her perfume, something expensive that made me think of Paris, though I'd never been. "Dance with me?" I stepped on her feet twice, but she just smiled and guided me through the steps. "You're going places, Ray," she said, tracing her finger along my calloused palm. "I can always spot ambition. It's like recognizing a good foundation. You can build anything on it." We married a year later at St. Catherine's Cathedral. Dorothy sat in the front row, wearing the first new dress she'd bought in a decade, tears streaming down her face. Veronica's family filled their side of the church: lawyers, doctors, investment bankers. My side had my construction crew, my mother's friends from the factory, and Father Miguel from our neighborhood parish. "She's beautiful, Raymond," Dorothy whispered at the reception, watching Veronica charm the governor's wife. "But remember, beautiful things need strong foundations, too. The early years were good. God, they were good." Mason arrived just as I landed my first municipal contract, a series of low-income housing units that I built with the same care as luxury homes. Veronica would bring him to job sites in a designer baby carrier, and my crew would stop everything to fuss over him. When Bethany was born 2 years later, we moved to the Westbridge estate. 7 bedrooms, 5 baths, a kitchen bigger than my mother's entire apartment. I'd stood in the marble foyer that first night, work boots in my hand, afraid to track dirt on the Persian rugs. "This is ours, Ray," Veronica had said, spinning in the space like a little girl. "You built this life for us." Every Sunday, Dorothy would drive over in her ancient Honda, bringing pot roast and stories from the old neighborhood. She'd sit with the kids while Veronica and I hosted neighbors, surgeons, CEOs, people who'd started calling me for their construction needs. "Never forget where you came from, Raymond," Dorothy would say, looking around our grand dining room. "This is beautiful, but family is what matters." Veronica would smile tightly, checking her watch, counting the minutes until Dorothy would leave and we could return to being the successful couple everyone envied. I should have paid more attention to those moments, the way Veronica's mask would slip when she thought no one was looking. The cracks in our marriage started small, like hairline fractures in a foundation that you don't notice until the walls start separating. It began the day my father, Harold, died. Not my biological father, though I didn't know that yet, but the man who'd raised me, taught me to read a level, and showed me that honest work meant something. Harold had been living in the veterans' home for 3 years since his dementia got bad. Veronica complained about the smell every time we visited, the way she had to sanitize her hands twice before touching anything in our car afterward. When he finally passed, she sent flowers but didn't come to the funeral. "Someone needs to stay with the children," she'd said, though Mason was 12 and Bethany 10, old enough to understand death and say goodbye to their grandfather. After Harold's funeral, Veronica hired Derek Castellano as her personal trainer. 6'2", bronzed like a statue, with the kind of smile that belonged on billboards. She said she needed to get in shape for her 40th birthday. 3 sessions a week became 5. 5 became daily. Her book club started meeting at wine bars downtown instead of members' houses. She'd come home at 2 a.m. showering before bed, claiming they'd gotten carried away discussing Hemingway. I buried myself in work, the way men do when they don't want to see what's right in front of them. Holloway Construction had just scored the Riverside redevelopment project, $30 million to revitalize the neighborhood where I'd grown up. It was everything I'd worked for, bringing good housing back to the people who'd supported me from the beginning. Then Dorothy got sick. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, the kind that gives you weeks, not years. I spent every evening at the hospice, holding her hand while she drifted in and out of consciousness. Veronica visited once, stayed 5 minutes, complained about the parking. "Your mother never liked me," she said one night when I came home late from the hospice. "That's not true," I said, though we both knew Dorothy saw through her in ways I'd refused to. "I'm going to my sister's for the weekend," Veronica announced. "This death watch is depressing the children." Her sister lived in Boston, but the credit card statement I found later showed charges from the Ritz-Carlton in Miami. Derek had posted Instagram photos from South Beach that same weekend, careful not to show who was with him. But I recognized Veronica's watch in one shot, the Cartier I'd given her for our anniversary. Dorothy died on a Tuesday morning while Veronica was at Pilates. I held my mother's hand as she took her last breath, her final words barely a whisper. "The truth always comes out, Raymond. Be ready." I thought she meant about Veronica's affair. I had no idea she meant the truth about my real father, hidden in a lockbox beneath her apartment floor for 42 years. The divorce papers were served while I was still wearing my funeral suit. Veronica had hired Preston Whitfield, the shark who'd handled the governor's divorce, and somehow got the wife everything despite proven infidelity. My company accounts were frozen within hours, our joint accounts emptied, credit cards canceled. "Financial malfeasance," Preston announced at the first hearing. "Mr. Holloway has been embezzling from his own company, hiding assets in offshore accounts, defrauding investors." The evidence was overwhelming and completely fabricated. Doctored invoices, forged signatures, phantom transactions dating back years. My lawyer, Carl, a public defender assigned when I couldn't afford anyone else, was out of his league. "This is sophisticated stuff, Ray," he'd said, flipping through pages of false documentation. "Someone with serious resources set this up." Judge Constance Fairweather presided over our case like she'd already written the verdict. Every objection Carl made was overruled. Every piece of evidence I presented was deemed inadmissible. Veronica sat there in designer suits, playing the wronged wife, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. The custody evaluator, Dr. Patricia Morse, interviewed the children once for 15 minutes. Her report painted me as an unstable workaholic who'd neglected his family for money. She never mentioned that I'd coached Mason's little league team for 6 years, or that I'd never missed one of Bethany's dance recitals. "Daddy's a thief," I heard Bethany tell her friend on the phone one night during my last week in the house. "Mom said he stole money from poor people." Mason stopped talking to me entirely. He'd found Derek's gym bag in our bedroom closet and made his own conclusions about why his parents were really divorcing, but Veronica had convinced him I was the villain in every version of the story. The final hearing was a massacre. Veronica got the house, 75% of my company, full custody, and monthly support payments that exceeded what I was now allowed to access. She'd won everything, and the celebration in her eyes as the judge read the verdict told me this had always been the plan. Stripped of everything, I returned to my mother's rent-controlled apartment in Riverside Heights, the same 3-room unit where I'd grown up. The elevator was still broken, just like it had been 30 years ago. I climbed the 5 flights with a single cardboard box containing everything I'd been allowed to take from my former life. Some clothes, my father Harold's tools, and a photo of Mason and Bethany from last Christmas before everything fell apart. Dorothy had kept the apartment even after I'd bought her a condo in a nicer neighborhood. "I need a connection to the old days, Raymond," she'd said when I'd asked why she wasted money on rent. "Some things are worth holding on to even when they don't make sense." Standing in that doorway, I finally understood what she meant. The apartment smelled like her lavender potpourri. The walls still painted the same butter yellow she'd chosen when I was 10. Her coffee mug sat on the kitchen counter, lipstick stain on the rim, like she'd just stepped out for groceries. I collapsed on the worn corduroy couch where I'd done my homework as a kid, where Harold had taught me to tie my shoes, where Dorothy had held me when I cried after being bullied at school. The cushions still bore the indent of her small frame from 40 years of sitting in the same spot, watching her programs while mending clothes. For 3 days, I didn't move except to use the bathroom. I ate stale crackers from Dorothy's pantry and drank water from the tap. My phone rang constantly, former employees, suppliers, clients wondering what had happened to their projects. I let it all go to voicemail. What could I tell them? That I'd been played for a fool? That the empire I'd built was now in the hands of a woman who wouldn't know a bearing wall from drywall? On the 4th day, hunger finally drove me to action. While looking for something edible in the kitchen, I found Dorothy's envelope of emergency cash hidden in the flour container, $300 in 20s, probably her entire savings. A note was wrapped around the bills. For Raymond, Mother knows best. The note broke something in me. I sat on her kitchen floor and cried for the first time since the divorce. Really cried, the kind of sobbing that comes from your gut and leaves you empty. When I was done, I heard Dorothy's voice in my head clear as day. Got to stay busy, Raymond. Idle hands make for troubled minds. I started cleaning. It was something to do, something I could control. I boxed her clothes for donation, sorted through decades of photographs, organized papers she'd kept in shoeboxes. In her bedroom closet, behind boxes of Christmas decorations and my old school reports she'd saved, I noticed something odd, a section of floorboard that didn't sit flush with the others. My carpenter's eye had been trained to spot imperfections, and this was definitely intentional. Using Harold's old pry bar from his tool belt, I worked the board loose. Underneath was a steel lockbox, military grade from the looks of it, covered in decades of dust. No key anywhere. I searched Dorothy's jewelry box, her drawers, even the coffee can where she'd kept spare change. Nothing. Finally, I took bolt cutters from Harold's tools and snapped the lock. My hands were shaking as I opened the lid. Inside were stacks of documents, photographs I'd never seen, and a manila folder marked Confidential, Raymond, in Dorothy's careful handwriting. On top was an envelope with my name written across it. I opened it and unfolded the letter inside, dated just 2 months ago, when Dorothy knew she was dying. My dearest Raymond, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're probably in the apartment wondering how you ended up back where you started. Life has a way of bringing us full circle, doesn't it? What I'm about to tell you will change everything, but I need you to understand I kept this secret out of love, not deception. I set the letter aside and opened the folder. The first document made my blood run cold. A birth certificate with my name, my birth date, but under Father, instead of Harold Holloway, it read Augustus Sterling. Augustus Sterling? The name hit me like a sledgehammer. Sterling Industries owned half the city. The Sterling Building downtown, Sterling Shipyards, Sterling Development Group. Augustus had died 5 years ago, leaving a fortune worth billions to his 3 children from his marriage. His funeral had shut down the financial district. I picked up Dorothy's letter again, my hands now trembling so badly I could barely read her writing. Augustus was your biological father. Harold knew from the beginning and loved you as his own. He was a better man than I deserved, Raymond. Augustus couldn't leave his wife, but he watched over you from a distance. Every contract you thought you earned on merit, he made sure you got a fair shot, nothing more. He was so proud when you succeeded on your own terms. The letter continued with an address and a name. Luther Grayson at Grayson Associates, 40th floor of the Sterling Building. He has been waiting for you, Dorothy had written. Go to him when you're ready to know everything. I wasn't ready, but I went anyway. The Sterling Building loomed over downtown like a glass and steel monument to everything I'd never been part of. The security guard looked at my worn jeans and work boots with suspicion until I mentioned Luther Grayson's name. One phone call later, I was in an executive elevator shooting up to the 40th floor. Luther Grayson was in his 70s, with silver hair and eyes that had seen every kind of family secret money could buy. When I walked into his office, he stood up slowly, studying my face like he was seeing a ghost. "My God," he said, "you look just like him, same jaw, same way of standing." Augustus always stood like he was ready to build something or tear it down. "You knew my father?" I asked, though the word felt foreign in my mouth. "I was his personal attorney for 40 years, Luther replied, gesturing for me to sit. "He spoke of you often, especially near the end. His greatest regret was not acknowledging you publicly, but he made provisions. Significant provisions." Luther pulled out a thick folder from his safe, handling it like it contained something sacred. "Augustus created a sealed trust 20 years ago, $50 million and a 30% stake in Sterling Industries, to be released only upon Dorothy's death, and only if you had, in his words, proven yourself through honest work and integrity. $50 million, 30% of Sterling Industries. The numbers didn't feel real. I'd been counting out $200 a week for groceries, and now this lawyer was telling me I was worth more than I'd ever dreamed. "There's more," Luther continued, his expression darkening. "We've been monitoring your divorce proceedings. Augustus had asked me to keep an eye on you, make sure you were protected. What we discovered about your ex-wife is disturbing." He pulled out another folder, this one filled with surveillance photos and documents. "Veronica Holloway isn't who she claims to be. Her real name is Victoria Nash. She's done this before, Mr. Holloway, 3 times in 3 different states. She targets successful men from working-class backgrounds, men who've built something from nothing." My stomach turned as Luther laid out photo after photo. Veronica with other men, all of them contractors or construction company owners, all of them divorced within 2 years of marriage, all of them stripped of their assets through similar fraud schemes. Her first husband in Arizona, Thomas Mitchell, lost his plumbing empire. Second one in Nevada, Robert Chen, had his electrical contracting business destroyed. Third, in Oregon, James Kovach, lost everything including custody of his children. Same pattern every time. Fabricated evidence of embezzlement, corrupt judges, custody stolen. "Judge Fairweather?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Luther slid across photos of Veronica and Judge Fairweather at a resort in Turks and Caicos, taken 2 months before my divorce filing. "They've been planning this for years. The judge, your wife's lawyer, Preston Whitfield, even Derek, the personal trainer, they're all part of it. They've run this scheme in 4 states, moving whenever authorities get too close." "Why didn't anyone stop them?" "Because men like you don't fight back," Luther said simply. "They're too broken, too ashamed, they disappear, start over somewhere else, never knowing they were victims of organized crime. But Augustus anticipated this might happen. He had investigators watching Veronica from the day she appeared at that charity gala." Luther picked up his phone. "Director Morrison, Luther Grayson. We're ready to move on the Nash case. Yes, he's here now." He hung up and looked at me. "The FBI has been building a case for 2 years. Your situation gave them everything they needed. Interstate fraud, racketeering, judicial corruption. They're moving in right now." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. A photo of FBI agents in tactical vests entering Veronica's Pilates studio. Another buzz, agents at Preston Whitfield's office. A third, Judge Fairweather being escorted from her chambers in handcuffs. "Your children are being picked up by Child Protective Services as we speak," Luther said. "They'll be brought here. Augustus bought this building, you know. He wanted his legacy to be something solid, something that would last, just like what you build." Within an hour, the 40th floor was swarming with federal agents. I gave my statement, provided every document I had, watched as they built a case that would destroy the network that had destroyed me. Veronica had been arrested at her studio, screaming about her rights, demanding her lawyer, who was already in custody himself. Then the door opened, and Mason and Bethany walked in with a social worker. They looked small, scared, confused. When they saw me, Bethany ran into my arms while Mason stood frozen, processing everything his world had become. 6 months later, I stood in the Sterling Industries boardroom, looking out at the city I'd helped build with my own hands. The other board members, my half-siblings who'd initially contested the will, sat around the polished table. Margaret Sterling, the eldest, had fought the hardest against accepting me until she saw what I could do with the development division. "You've doubled our quarterly profits," Margaret admitted, sliding the latest financial report across the table. "Father would be impressed. We were losing millions on stalled projects before you restructured the division." I'd kept things simple. Hired back my old foreman Lou, and the crew Veronica had fired out of spite, put them in charge of quality control. Turns out, Sterling Industries had been hemorrhaging money because nobody on the board actually understood construction. They'd been approving change orders without reading them, accepting delays without penalties, treating buildings like numbers on spreadsheets instead of steel and concrete that needed proper foundations. "Your father understood construction," I told Margaret. "That's why he built this empire. He just forgot to teach any of you how to hold a hammer." She laughed, the first genuine warmth I'd seen from her. "He tried. I was more interested in ballet. Michael wanted to play violin. Jennifer collected art. You were the only one who inherited his need to build things." Veronica got 15 years federal time. The trial had been swift. The FBI's evidence was overwhelming. She'd stolen over $40 million across 4 states, destroyed 12 families, corrupted 3 judges and 7 lawyers. Derek flipped immediately, testifying against everyone to avoid prosecution. He admitted to breaking into my office, planting the false documents, even seducing Veronica as part of the scheme. Turns out she was being conned, too, in her own way. Judge Fairweather received 20 years. Preston Whitfield was disbarred and got 12. The other victims were getting their cases reviewed, their assets returned where possible. Thomas Mitchell from Arizona called to thank me. He'd been living in his truck for 3 years, thinking he'd lost his mind along with his business. I rebuilt Holloway Construction as a Sterling subsidiary but kept the original name. It meant something in Riverside Heights, and I wasn't about to abandon it. We focused on affordable housing, the kind of projects Augustus had apparently pushed Sterling Industries toward for years, but never could implement without someone who understood working families. Carl, my former lawyer, who'd tried his best against impossible odds, now ran our new legal initiative. We provided pro bono representation for fathers facing custody battles, especially those being railroaded by corrupt systems. In our first year, we helped 43 men keep their children, exposed 2 more judicial corruption schemes, and forced 3 states to review their family court procedures. The real victory came in smaller moments. Mason pitched a perfect game in the championship with me coaching first base. He'd grown 3 inches and his voice was changing, but he still looked for my approval after every strike. Bethany starred in her school's production of Annie, belting out Tomorrow, with a confidence that reminded me of Dorothy's quiet strength. We kept Dorothy's apartment exactly as she'd left it. I couldn't let it go. It was where I'd discovered who I was, where the truth had literally been beneath my feet all those years. Sunday dinners happened there now, my kids doing homework at the same kitchen table where I'd learned algebra, where Dorothy had helped me write my first business plan on notebook paper. "Why don't we eat at the big house, Dad?" Bethany asked one evening, looking around the tiny kitchen. "Because this is where we remember who we are," I said, serving Dorothy's pot roast recipe that I'd finally mastered. "Your grandmother kept this place for 40 years, even when she could afford better. She knew something I'm just learning. Money isn't about what you can buy, it's about what you choose to keep." Mason looked up from his geometry homework. "Grandma Dorothy would have loved seeing you run Sterling Industries." "She already knew I would," I replied, pulling out her letter, now framed on the wall. "She knew exactly who I was, even when I didn't know myself." That's what real love looks like. Believing in someone enough to let them find their own way to the truth. From Dorothy's kitchen window, you could see the Sterling building lit up against the night sky. She'd spent 40 years looking at that building, knowing her son would one day help run it, never saying a word. That took a strength I was only beginning to understand. The measure of a person, I told my children as we cleared the dishes, isn't what they inherit or what they take. It's what they build with their own hands and how they respond when everything falls apart. Your grandmother knew that. Harold knew it when he raised me as his own. Now we know it too. The floorboard I'd pried up had been carefully replaced, but sometimes I still touch that spot, remembering the moment everything changed. Dorothy had hidden the truth beneath our feet, but she'd also built the foundation that helped me survive discovering it. Every building needs a strong foundation, I said, repeating what I'd learned from Harold, from Dorothy, from Augustus watching from afar. Sometimes you have to dig deep to find it, but it's always there, waiting to hold up everything you're meant to build. Thank you for watching this story unfold. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to rebuild from nothing, or discovered that truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below about a time when you discovered something that changed everything. I read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about real people facing impossible odds and finding their way through. Remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property. It's the strength to stand back up when life knocks you down.